I'm Chris Stewart. I'm a licensed professional counselor practicing in Fredericksburg, Texas. And I have more than 30 years of experience working with children and families. I was raised by a psychologist. I usually say that's why I'm a little bit strange. It's because I was raised by a psychologist, Dr. Keith Stewart, in San Antonio. I went to high school in Bernie. And interesting that we're talking about stress and managing stress tonight, because I want you to know that stress is a part of everything we do from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, and even affects some of the things that happen while we sleep and the way we dream and things like that. And what we're going to go over today is how to manage that stress in such a way to maintain and sustain your enthusiasm for working with children and families that support those children. My father was a psychologist, and I knew stress early on. My father used to speak all over the country and different events in San Antonio, and I was the little kid that would stand by the old overhead projector that had those transparencies, and I'd put the transparencies on, and it was always stressful because his cue was he'd just look at me and give me the thumbs up, and I had to be able to turn and put them on there, and sometimes I'd put them down, upside down or backwards where you couldn't read them, and my father would respond in a kind, funny way, and it just added to the entertainment of the evening. Later in life, as I was a practicing therapist in the Rio Grande Valley, I began to work with athletes, the golf team, the basketball team, and other athletes at the University of Texas, Pan American in Edinburgh, Texas. And I worked with them for about 6 to 8 years. And it was when I worked with athletes, it was the only time that I was ever called by journalists asking me, you know, what are you doing to help these athletes? It was the only time anybody even cared what I was doing to help people have what they wanted to in their lives. And so some of the athletes started doing better, and they were telling them that I was helping them, and that's why I was getting the calls. And I got a call one time to go to Wisconsin to a group of sports psychologists that work with Olympic athletes. Most of them had PhDs, had written books, the most intimidating group I'd ever spoken before. The scariest group. Here I was, I hadn't finished a book, I just have a master's degree, and they were asking me to come up and present at their event so they could hear about what I was doing and how these athletes were doing better because of some things I was doing with them. So I went up there, and I was scared to death, I will tell you. I was scared. I was stressed, to stay with our topic line. But I knew that if I had a good, funny story or an introductory story or something at the first, if I knew I could get that out right at the front first, I'd be fine. But I flew into the airport, and I didn't have that story yet. And so I was struggling. I was really stressing. As the taxi driver was driving to the place I was supposed to go speak, I was getting nervous. And the taxi driver had the radio on some station that there was a preacher preaching on the radio. And the preacher on the radio says, "The greatest love I've ever known was in the arms of another man's wife." And he paused for a moment, and he says, "And those arms were the arms of my loving mother, who taught me unconditional love and support that's made a difference in my life." And I said, that's it. That's my story. That's my beginning story. That's what I'm going to tell them when I get there. So I was terrified. I was sweating before they introduced me, and they introduced me, and normally I'd stand up there and say some things about myself and what I do, but the first thing out of my mouth when I went up there, they introduced me, the first thing out of my mouth was, "The greatest love I've ever known was in the arms of another man's wife." And the look of shock and horror on their face caught me off guard. I wasn't ready for it. And so being stressed, I blocked. So I just stood there and looked at all these bewildered people, and I started sweating. And then I even murmured under my breath, and they could hear it. And for the life of me, I can't remember who that was. And it took me a while to regain my composure, and I said, oh yeah, oh yeah. It was in the arms of a loving mother who taught me unconditional love and support. And so I was able to move on from that story, and that's all we need.